I was sitting at my own kitchen table when my son-in-law's voice came through the phone loud enough that I had to hold it away from my ear. He wasn't shouting exactly. It was that particular tone men use when they want to sound reasonable but can't quite manage it. "You have more than enough, Lillian," he said. "More than enough for one person." I had been pouring my evening tea when he called. The kettle was still in my hand. I set it down slowly so I wouldn't spill anything, and I looked out through the window at my backyard. The birch trees were going yellow. October in Nova Scotia does that fast, strips everything down before you're ready. "I'm not asking you to live poorly," he continued. "I'm just saying that at your stage of life, you don't need all that extra cushion. We do. My stage of life, I'm 63 years old. I worked 31 years as a registered nurse at the Cape Breton Regional Hospital, double shifts through 3 flu seasons that I thought might actually break me, and I retired with a pension I earned 1 hour at a time. I am not wealthy, but I am comfortable." And apparently that was the problem. I didn't argue with him that night. I said I'd think about it, hung up, and let my tea go cold sitting right there on the table. My daughter had married Garretson 4 years earlier in a small ceremony in Baddeck that I helped pay for because they said they wanted simple but meant expensive. He was a project manager for a construction firm, and my daughter worked in marketing for a logistics company out of Dartmouth. Together, they earned what I considered a very decent living. Certainly more than I ever made in my 30s when I was raising her alone after her father left. Certainly enough to cover their own expenses. But it had not worked out that way. It had started small the way these things always do. A short-term loan when their hot water heater failed. 2 years ago, that was. I had transferred the money through e-transfer on a Tuesday morning, and by Thursday I'd stopped expecting to see it again. Then there was the matter of the car. My daughter called it a safety issue. The tires, the brakes. "A rattle," she said. The mechanic told her was serious. I had paid the bill directly to the shop. Then the property tax shortfall one spring when they had extended their trip to Portugal and come home to a bill they hadn't budgeted for. I hadn't been invited on that trip. That was what I thought about after I put the phone down. Not the money. The Portugal trip, the photos I saw on my daughter's Instagram weeks after they came home, the 2 of them at a sunset dinner on what looked like a terrace in Lisbon, my son-in-law with a glass of wine. My daughter smiling the way she used to smile at me when she was small and had gotten something she wanted. I walked to my spare bedroom that night. I keep my financial records in a fireproof box under the bed because I lived through my mother losing everything in a house fire when I was 8, and some habits stay with you. I pulled out the box and brought it to the kitchen table and opened it under the overhead light. I am a nurse. I document things. I have always documented things. I went through the records slowly, the way I used to go through a patient's chart before a shift handover, making sure I understood the full picture. The hot water heater repair, $1,340. The car service, $890. The property tax, $200. The months I had paid their internet and cell phone bills directly because they said they were in a tight stretch. The groceries I had ordered and had delivered to their address during the first year of the pandemic when they told me they were overwhelmed. The dental bill for my daughter when she needed a crown and said their benefits didn't cover the full amount. The RRSP contribution I had quietly topped up in her name because she said she and Garrett hadn't had room to save that year. I had a notebook in the box too. I'd been writing amounts down without ever really thinking about why. Maybe because I'm a nurse, and writing things down is just how I'm built. Maybe because some part of me had already known. I counted the entries. 87 payments over 3 years and 4 months. The total was sitting on the page in my own handwriting, and I still had to read it 3 times before my brain would accept it. I had given them more than $46,000. In after-tax money, money I had already paid income tax on, money from the pension I had worked 3 decades for, money from the modest investments I had made carefully over the years because I had no one else to rely on in my old age. $46,000, and I had a dripping faucet in my upstairs bathroom I'd been putting off fixing for 8 months. I sat with that for a long time. I didn't cry. I'm not sure why not. Maybe I was too tired. Maybe the number was too large to feel real. Or maybe some part of me had already been grieving this for years without having the word for what I was losing. I closed the notebook. I made myself another cup of tea. I sat in the chair I have sat in every evening since I moved into this house 11 years ago, and I let the silence do what silence does. I thought about what my son-in-law had said. More than enough for one person, at your stage of life. I thought about the way he said it, unhurried, certain. The way someone speaks when they have decided they are owed something and have simply been waiting for the right moment to collect. And then I thought, he's right. I have been giving more than enough. I have been giving until the seams of my own life were starting to pull. The next morning, I called my financial advisor, a woman named Susan, who has handled my accounts since I was 50, and who has the manner of someone who has heard everything and is no longer surprised by any of it. I asked her to walk me through every automatic transfer connected to my accounts. There were 19. Some I knew about. Some I had forgotten. One I had set up during a week when my daughter was crying on the phone, and I couldn't remember the specific reason anymore, only the feeling of needing to make it stop. Susan read them out one by one, and I wrote down every one. When she was done, I told her to cancel all of them. All 19? She asked. All 19, I said. Today? There was a pause. Susan has known me a long time. She asked quietly whether everything was all right. Everything is finally becoming clear, I told her. She processed the cancellations. She also flagged something that made the room go strange and small around me. There had been a request 3 weeks earlier to add an authorized user to my investment account. The name on the request was Garrett Sloan. I asked her to repeat it. She did. The request had been submitted through an online portal with a filled-in authorization form. The signature on the form was supposed to be mine. Susan had cued it for in-person verification as part of the institution's fraud protocol, which was why it hadn't gone through yet. She had been meaning to call me about it, she said, and her voice had that particular quality of someone who is professionally composed but quietly horrified. Cancel it, I said. Flag it. Don't let anything go through on that account without me standing in your office. Already done, she said. I stayed on the phone with her for another 20 minutes and changed every security question, every PIN, every beneficiary designation. By the time I hung up, my hands were shaking, but not from fear, from something colder and more useful than fear. The first message from my daughter came that afternoon. Netflix, she said, was showing a payment error. Could I check my card? I read the message and set my phone face down on the counter. The next one came an hour later. The grocery delivery subscription had been declined. Then a message from Garrett, direct and businesslike, saying the property management company had sent a notice about an automatic payment that hadn't processed. "Not sure what's happening on your end," he wrote, "but can you sort this out today? Can you sort this out today?" I put on my coat and went outside. My backyard in October is not much to look at, but there's a vegetable garden I put in 4 summers ago that I'm still proud of. Most things were finished for the season, but the kale was still standing, the way kale always does, stubborn and dark green even after the first frosts. I worked in the garden for an hour and let the phone buzz in my pocket. When I came back inside and washed my hands, there were 14 messages. By evening, the tone had shifted. My daughter's messages had moved from confusion to frustration to something I could only read as panic. The property tax was due. The car insurance renewal was coming. Could I please just explain what was happening? Was I sick? Was something wrong? Garrett sent one message that I read several times. "This is not the time for whatever this is. Call me." I did not call him. 3 days passed. On the 4th day, my daughter drove up from Dartmouth, unannounced. I heard the car in the driveway and watched her come up the front walk from the window, her shoulders set the way they get when she's bracing for something. I opened the door before she could knock. We sat at the kitchen table. I made tea. She had circles under her eyes. "Mom," she said, "what is happening?" "Garrett is losing his mind. The insurance company called. We got a letter from the mortgage company because the top-up payment didn't come through." I hadn't known about a top-up payment on the mortgage. That one I had to write down separately when she said it. I asked her to tell me exactly what it was. She explained, hesitantly, that when they had renewed their mortgage 2 years ago, they had stretched to a price point that was slightly above what they could service on their own. Garrett had suggested they structure the payments knowing that I would cover a portion each month. He'd called it a family contribution arrangement when he brought it up with the mortgage broker. He had built my money into their mortgage without telling me. I sat with that for a moment. The kale outside the window was very still. The clock on the wall my mother gave me was ticking the way it always does. "Did you know he did that?" I asked. My daughter looked at the table. She didn't answer right away, which was its own kind of answer. "We needed the house," she said finally. "It's a good house. The schools are good. Did you know?" I asked again. "I thought it would work out," she said. "I thought we'd get ahead and it would matter less and less. What came from you and what came from us. I thought it would sort itself out." I opened the kitchen drawer and took out the notebook. I set it on the table and pushed it across to her. She looked at it like she didn't want to touch it. Then she opened it. I watched her read. I watched the color in her face change. "Mom," she said softly. 87 entries, I said. $46,000. I have a dripping tap I haven't fixed. I've been driving on the same winter tires for 4 seasons because I kept telling myself there were more pressing things to spend money on. I paused. There weren't, actually. I just kept choosing your pressing things over mine. She closed the notebook. She was crying now, quietly, the kind of crying that doesn't make a lot of noise. "I didn't realize how much it was," she said. "I know," I said. That was the problem. I told her about the canceled transfers. All 19 of them, all gone. I told her about the fraud flag on my investment account. I watched her face when I said the word fraud. Something moved across it, something complicated. She said she didn't know about that, and I believe she was telling the truth. But I also know that not knowing a thing your spouse has done is not the same as being uninvolved in the life that made it possible. "Mom," she said, What do we do? How do we manage the mortgage? The insurance is all ready. That's a question for you and Garrett, I said gently. And possibly for a financial counselor, not for me. She looked at me across the table. Her eyes were red. She looked younger than she has in years, or maybe more honest. I'm not sure which. Are you cutting us off? She asked. I'm stopping something that should never have started, I said. I'm your mother, not your bank. I love you. Those two things can both be true. She left an hour later. I stood in the doorway and watched her drive away, and I felt a sadness in my chest that I hadn't expected. Not for the money, but for the distance that had been quietly growing between us for years, and that the money had somehow been filling, or that I had let myself believe it was filling. In the weeks that followed, I heard about the consequences in pieces, the way you hear about weather moving through from people who were closer to it. A neighbor mentioned she'd seen a moving company truck outside their house. My daughter eventually told me on the phone that they were selling and looking for something more modest. She said it in a flat voice that I recognized as the voice of someone who is exhausted from being angry and has run out of energy for it. Garrett called once. He did not apologize. He told me what I had done had created a serious hardship and that he hoped I understood that. I told him I understood that it had created a hardship. I told him I hoped that hardship would teach them both to build a life that belonged to them. He hung up. What I hadn't expected was my granddaughter. She's 17, and she had just gotten her first part-time job at a coffee shop near their house. She texted me on a Thursday evening, asking if she could come visit on Saturday. I said, of course. She showed up with a bag of groceries she'd bought with her own money. Actual groceries, eggs and good bread, and a wedge of the old cheddar she knows I like. And she stood at my counter and made us both scrambled eggs, like it was the most natural thing in the world. We ate at the kitchen table, and she told me about the job. Her boss was particular about the latte foam, she said, and she'd been practicing at home. She'd bought herself a second-hand textbook for the biology course she was taking and found it for $12 at a church sale in her neighborhood. She seemed genuinely pleased about the $12. At some point, she looked at me and said, "Grandma, my mom told me some of what happened. I don't think what they did was fair." I told her that fairness is complicated inside families. She shook her head a little, the way young people do when they think you're being polite about something. "I want to pay my own way," she said. "I've wanted that for a while. I just didn't always know how to say it in a house where that wasn't really how things worked." I squeezed her hand across the table. She is going to be all right, that girl. Maybe more all right than any of the rest of us. The investigations took longer than I expected. The fraud matter, I should say, not the family matter, though both took their time. The bank's security department was thorough. They confirmed the authorization form, submitted under my signature, was not mine. Susan connected me with a fraud specialist, and I sat in an office in Sydney one November afternoon and answered questions and signed a declaration and left the matter in their hands. I was told Garrett would be contacted. I was told the process would take several weeks. He called me the night after they contacted him. For the first time in all of it, his voice had lost that quality of certainty. He asked me if I had reported him. "I reported the fraud," I said. "That's not the same as reporting you. Though it involves you." "Lillian," he said, "this could affect my career." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry that's frightening. You should have thought about this before you put your name on a form with my signature on it." He started to say something else, and I told him, quietly, that I had nothing more to say to him that night, and that he should speak to a lawyer, and I wished him well, and I hung up. I sat in my kitchen for a long time after that. I am not a vengeful person. Nursing teaches you things about suffering that make vengeance feel very small and very foolish. But I am also not a person who will hand someone the key to everything I've spent my life building and look away while they make a copy. My daughter and I have been finding our way back slowly. She called in November, then again in December. The house sold, and they moved into a rental in Dartmouth, a 3-bedroom apartment that she described with the careful neutrality of someone adjusting to new circumstances. She is working extra hours. She mentioned that Garrett had started meeting with a financial counselor, which she said in a tone that made me think it was not entirely his own idea. There was something new in her voice in those phone calls, something quieter and more real. She came for Christmas Eve dinner, just her and my granddaughter. Garrett had plans elsewhere, which suited everyone. We made tourtière together, the old recipe from my grandmother that my daughter has asked me to write down every Christmas for 15 years, and I never have because I'm not sure it exists as a recipe so much as it exists as a memory of doing it by feel. We made it by feel. My granddaughter learned how to crimp the pastry edge and was unreasonably proud of it in the best possible way. We ate at the kitchen table. I lit the candles I save for occasions. My daughter reached over at some point during and put her hand over mine, and she said she was sorry, and I believed her, and I told her so. After dinner, my granddaughter washed the dishes without being asked, standing at the sink with the radio on, singing to herself, comfortable, in my kitchen, in the way that I hope she carries through her whole life, the knowledge that she is welcome here, that this is a place that loves her. Later, after they'd driven away and I was alone in the house, I made myself a cup of chamomile and sat by the window with my knitting. The street was quiet. The neighbors across the way had a wreath on the door with a red bow that the wind had turned sideways. I am 63 years old. I have a pension I earned, and savings I protected, and a faucet that is no longer dripping because I called the plumber in November and paid him from money that used to go somewhere it was never really appreciated. I have a garden I planted myself, and a granddaughter who buys cheddar with her coffee shop money, and a daughter I am slowly finding my way back to on more honest ground. I have a house that's mine. And some evenings, when the tea is warm and the knitting is going well, and the birch trees are bare and silver in the streetlight, that feels like more than enough.